Good morning everyone, it's July 2024, it's about 8:15 on a Tuesday morning and I'm travelling against the peak on a down Mernda train. I've just left Clifton Hill and I'm about to get off at Rushall, where we will start today's little adventure.
Now arriving at Rushall.
This is the first proper sunny morning we've had in a few weeks, and it's a proper winter morning, about 10 degrees Celsius. In this video we're going to go for a bike ride along the Inner Circle Railway, which is an abandoned railway line not far from central Melbourne. Here at Rushall we're about 4 kilometres in a straight line from the CBD. The Inner Circle opened in 1888, running between Royal Park on what is now the Upfield line and Clifton Hill on what is now the Mernda and Hurstbridge lines, with a short branch down to Fitzroy. Before 1901, it was the only connection between the Clifton Hill Group lines and the city, with the direct route via Collingwood having not yet been built. The passenger service on the Inner Circle was always patchy and was completely withdrawn in 1948. The connection at the Clifton Hill end closed to all trains in 1965, but goods traffic through to Fitzroy managed to hang on until 1981. This is going to be a fairly slow-paced video where we explore the length of the line in real time and have a look at what remains of the railway today. For an inner city line that's been closed for over 4 decades, there's still quite a lot of surviving stuff to see. Now you can see here, as my train is departing, it's not going very fast and it's taking a very tight curve around to the right towards the viaduct over the Merry Creek. This is actually the tightest mainline curve in Victoria, and the reason it's like that is that it's the one remaining side of the former triangular junction with the Inner Circle, which diverged off to the left here. And there's an up train coming in. There's a 30 km/h limit in both directions on the curve. Okay, so this is the start of the Inner Circle Linear Park, and as you can see we're curving around to the left to follow the former rail alignment. We're just going to take a little detour around to the right here so we can have a look at the other former leg of the triangle, the one that once pointed towards Mernda and Whittlesea. There's a community garden in the middle here, and you can very obviously see how the overhead wiring structures are still in place, showing where the junction was. And yes, the Inner Circle was electrified from 1921, with the exception of the Fitzroy branch. Most of the overhead structures have been removed, but there's still some high voltage railway feeder wires running along here, joining up the Mernda and Upfield lines, which are supported on original poles. Okay, so this is our first level crossing with Bennett Street. They spelled it wrong, unfortunately. We actually have right of way here, and certainly the bike track is a lot busier than many of these minor roads. I should say, you can see the whole corridor is quite wide here, and as a general rule the railway was on the northern side of this space, so on the right hand side in this direction. But the path largely runs along the southern side, so we're not always riding exactly where the track was, but as soon as there's anything to see over there, we'll do a bit of off-roading and go have a look. This road running along to our left is called Park Street, which is very fitting today, but it was actually called that when this was still a railway and not a park. And it's really named because of Royal Park, which it runs along the top of a few kilometres further west from here. Now we're coming up to St George's Road, which is one of the busier roads that the Inner Circle crossed, and also carries tram route 11. So keeping in mind that the Inner Circle was electrified and we're crossing an electrified tramway, this was once the location of what's known as a tramway square, one of many that existed around Melbourne and one of 3 that existed on this line. And they had a section of overhead wire above the crossing that could be switched between 1500 volts DC for the railway and 600 volts DC for the trams. There are still 2 operational tramway squares in Melbourne at Riversdale and Kooyong. You can really start to see what the peak hour cycling traffic is like along here. Now we're going to take another diversion here because this is the junction for the branch down to Fitzroy, which is also, conveniently, a bike track. So we're very quickly back at St George's Road again, and this was a separate level crossing from the one we crossed a few moments ago, which is only about 100 metres to our left. Unlike that crossing, this one has no lights or anything, in fact, so we just have to wait for a gap. You can very clearly see that we're on a gently curving rail alignment here. Now this is Scotchmer Street, where we also have right of way, and if you look very carefully, the rails are still visible embedded in the crossing. When the line was ripped up, they generally left the rails in place in most of the level crossings to save having to rip up the road surface. Now this is Alfred Crescent, and the rails are much more obvious here. We don't have right of way at this one, and I'm not too keen on the fact that it's a bit random like that. So we're now entering the Edinburgh Gardens. When I was a kid, there was a plinth K-class steam locomotive just here, which we used to play on. In my memory, it was just here on the right, but I could be wrong about that. It might have been on the left. I now know that the locomotive in question was K174, and in the late 90s it went to the Mornington Tourist Railway as a source for spare parts. You might think the park here came after the railway closed, but it didn't. The park was here first, and the railway absolutely just ran through the middle like this. This part of the path is pretty much bang on the rail alignment, and you can see we continue with these very gradual curves. Another short bit of track here. Then at this point where the path S-bends to the right, the railway more or less stayed straight, leading to the Fitzroy goods yard and station, which were just ahead on the left up here. Passenger trains only ran down here until 1892, finishing just 4 years after the line opened, and I've never seen a picture of what the station actually looked like. But as I mentioned earlier, goods trains did run down here into the early 80s. So the actual site of the station and yard was at the end of the park here and has now vanished under that block of houses that you can see coming up on the left. So sadly there's no real obvious remains here. Up until about 20 years ago, there was still a footbridge over the old yard, which, just like K174, has now been relocated to the Mornington Tourist Railway, who have installed it at Mernda Station. Now I've just stopped here because is that a railway gatepost? It might be, I'm honestly not sure. Alright, I think that's about all there is to see at Fitzroy. Now let's do a quick express run back to the junction. Whenever I post videos from my bike, I always get comments about the tyre noise. Yeah, it's a mountain bike. It's not very efficient on pavement like this. That was quite satisfying how obedient those cars were, obviously very well trained in this area. I'm just going to double back for a moment because I just spotted something. Nice name for a street. Okay, when I said this would be an express run, maybe limited express. If you're in a rush here and not trying to stick to the rail alignment like I am, it might be quicker to turn right here and cross at the lights up at the main crossing. Okay, so we're back at the junction with the main inner circle, and I'm immediately going to go over here where the actual track was. Because some of it is still here. Under this small dog. There must have been a bit of a yard in this area. This, I believe, is a weighbridge for weighing loaded wagons before they depart. Another set of points in the ground here. And this is Brunswick Street North. If you know your Victorian Railways architecture, you might have spotted the next feature coming up. This is by far the largest remaining artefact on the line. This is the North Fitzroy Railway Substation. It was built in 1915 as part of the original electrification scheme and provided power not only to the inner circle but also to trains on part of the line towards Reservoir and the entire line up to Coburg. And there's some track in the crossing here too. Just going to loop around a bit here and have a better look at the building. Now we're coming up to Ray Street, and on the far side is the location of North Fitzroy Station. You can see the double track level crossing, and the station was pretty much immediately on the other side. You can see the path goes up over the top of the platform mound. That's an old overhead wiring pole base, now being used to hold pigeons. So we're up on the platform now. Unfortunately the building didn't survive here, but you can also see the row of peppercorn trees which the VR like to plant around stations. So I'm just going to curve around and have a look at the other side of the platform mound. It might be a bit hard to see, but there are a few bits of concrete and some bluestone, which are probably relics from the station. Now here we are at Nicholson Street, which is another former tramway square, crossing tram route 96. And we've got an E-Class heading to the city. You might be starting to get the idea of why this railway never attracted very many passengers. All these tram lines we're crossing run directly to the city, which the inner circle very much didn't. The trams were always much higher frequency, and there would have been very few circumstances where it was better to catch the train. The other thing you've probably noticed is just how busy this bike path is, and it connects with major cycling routes at each end too, so I'd argue this corridor is still performing a pretty important transport role today, as well as having a lot of nice parkland. Just going to make a small diversion off the path here. You can see the rails in the crossing still, including the check rails leading up to the tram crossing. It vanishes under the tram platform now. And there's also this sign made out of bits of rail and displaying some railway history. Those brick houses on the right are actually directly on the rail alignment, as we can see if we go over here. This street is a mess. No, really, that's what it's called. That tree has obviously come up sometime in the last 40 years. Now, I pulled over here because I saw this building which I'd never noticed before and thought, that looks remarkably like a cable tram engine house. It took me a bit of digging when I got home, but yes, that's exactly what it is, and there was a cable tram route which terminated just there at the end of Rathdown Street. Now we're coming up to Lygon Street, which is tram routes 1 and 6, and there's a Z-Class just zipping past. Once again, we have the track still in the crossing, complete with jack rails. Looks like I need to get in the queue. So just on the other side of Lygon Street, the line curves to the left a bit and we get to North Carlton Station, which has survived to a much greater extent than poor old North Fitzroy, as you're about to see. There are some lovely original lattice overhead wiring poles along here carrying the feeder cables, which are over 100 years old now. And here on the left is North Carlton Station, which still has its building intact. This is a Melbourne type building, which you'll know all about from my Upfield line video. It survived because the railways used it for employee accommodation for many years, and now it's the North Carlton Railway Neighbourhood House. There's even still a train here. Alright, now for the final section to Royal Park. This is Bowen Crescent, which has visible rails and some bits of white picket fencing from the level crossing. So at this point the line started to drop down into a cutting, and up here is the bridge carrying Royal Parade and Tram Route 19. As far as I can tell, this wasn't a grade separation, it was actually built like this from the start in 1888. Then here we've got a surviving overhead wire gantry, and then there's another road bridge carrying the avenue. From here, the end of the cutting has been filled in, so we're slowly climbing up to the top of the embankment, and you can see there's another gantry here which has been half buried. You might recognise this spot if you watched my Brunswick bike versus train race, which also came through here. And then over on the right here is the Upfield line. Might be a bit hard to see from here, but the cutting is quite wide, and the two tracks from the inner circle ran parallel to the Upfield line for a few hundred metres down to the junction. Now I've just realised I need to be on the next train from Royal Park, and it's due in 2 minutes. Luckily, it's mostly downhill. You can see a few 4-track gantries down there in the cutting that once spanned both lines. So here we are, back on the operational rail network at Royal Park. For a few closing thoughts, the inner circle never made much sense as a passenger route, given it was crossed by 4 tram lines running direct to the city with short walkable distances in between, and honestly I think the land is probably better used today as a mixture of parkland and as a through route for pedestrians and cyclists. Historically the line was useful for goods trains, but the industries they served are mostly no longer there. If you really wanted to reinstate a passenger rail service here today, I wouldn't do it with heavy rail. I'd make it a tram along Park Street, which would allow the linear park to stay as it is. Thanks very much for coming along. If you enjoyed this kind of slow-paced exploration video, I've done quite a few of these, both cycling and on foot, so make sure you check out that playlist. Thank you very much for watching.